When normal breaks down, really breaks down, the people who survive it best are almost never the ones who panic the least. They're the ones who prepared the most. And a huge part of that preparation is understanding how to protect what you have, where you live, and the people inside those walls. So today, we're covering 15 ways to defend your home from looters, thieves, and marauders when SHTF. Way 15. Understand the threat before you build the defense. Before any physical preparation makes sense, you need to understand what you're actually defending against. Because looters, thieves, and marauders are not a single category. They behave differently, they're motivated differently, and they respond to different deterrents. Opportunistic looters are the most common threat in the early stages of any crisis. These are people who wouldn't normally steal anything. They're taking advantage of a temporary absence of consequences. They want easy targets. They are not willing to work hard for what they're taking. They're not willing to take significant risks, and they will move on the moment a target presents meaningful resistance or a simpler option nearby. Against opportunistic looters, visibility of deterrence is often enough. A locked gate, a visible dog, lights that suggest occupancy. These work because the opportunist is selecting for ease. Organized criminal groups operating during a crisis are a more serious threat. These are people who were already operating outside the law before the crisis began, who have experience with violence or the threat of it, and who may be willing to invest more effort for a bigger payoff. Against this category, passive deterrence alone are not sufficient. Layered physical security, community coordination, and the credible presence of people willing and able to defend the property become necessary. The third category, desperate people driven by genuine need, is the most complicated morally and the most unpredictable tactically. A person watching their children go hungry will take risks that a rational cost-benefit analysis wouldn't support. This category requires both physical preparation and, where possible, community-level solutions that address the underlying desperation before it reaches your door. Knowing which type of threat you're most likely to face in your specific location, urban, suburban, rural, near distribution centers, or supply routes, shapes every decision that follows. Starting with an honest threat assessment is not paranoia. It's what a professional security consultant does on day one. Way 14. Establish a defensible perimeter. The fundamental principle of defensive security is depth, creating multiple layers between a threat and what you're protecting, each layer requiring effort and time to breach, each breach buying you more time to respond. A defensible perimeter starts at the property line, not the front door. The goal is to make unauthorized entry difficult, slow, noisy, or visible well before anyone reaches the structure itself. Fencing is the obvious starting point, but not all fencing is equal. A decorative picket fence is a social boundary marker, not a security measure. A 6-foot solid privacy fence with no footholds delays an intruder and blocks observation of what's inside. A fence topped with metal spikes, broken glass set in mortar, or commercial anti-climb strips becomes a meaningful obstacle. Natural barriers are often more effective and less conspicuous than constructed ones. Thorny hedges, hawthorn, Osage orange, roses, or barberry, planted densely along a property line create a barrier that is genuinely difficult to push through quickly and quietly. Hawthorn in particular, used for centuries in European agricultural hedgerows, produces thorns up to an inch long and grows densely enough to stop livestock, let alone a person trying to move quickly and silently. These plants take time to establish, but, once mature, require almost no maintenance and don't announce themselves as security measures the way steel fencing does. Controlling entry and exit points is the companion principle. A property with one controlled gate is significantly easier to defend than one with multiple entry points that all require monitoring. Where the layout allows, reducing the number of functional entry points, closing off secondary access routes not regularly needed, reduces the defensive perimeter that has to be actively managed. Way 13. Harden entry points. Doors and windows are the primary points of entry into any structure, and in standard residential construction, they're considerably weaker than most people assume. A standard residential exterior door, hollow core, with a standard deadbolt, can be kicked open in 1 or 2 attempts by a person of average size. The failure point is almost never the lock itself. It's the door frame, specifically the strike plate, which in standard construction is held in place by screws that are 3/4 of an inch long and anchored into soft wood framing. Replacing those screws with 3-inch screws that reach into the structural framing and replacing the standard strike plate with a heavy-gauge steel reinforcement plate costs about $15 and an hour of work and makes the same door dramatically more resistant to forced entry. Door frame reinforcement kits, available from security suppliers, take this further by adding steel backing to the entire door frame. Solid core doors, doors with a solid wood or composite core rather than a hollow interior, resist both kicking and cutting far better than hollow core equivalents. This is the single most impactful upgrade for any exterior door in terms of resistance to forced entry. Windows present a different challenge. Standard residential window glass breaks easily and quietly. Security film, a thick polyester laminate applied to the interior surface of glass, does not prevent glass from breaking, but holds the shards together and significantly increases the time and effort required to breach the opening. Window security film rated to UL 972 standard can withstand repeated impacts that would instantly defeat unprotected glass. Polycarbonate glazing, used in security applications, is essentially unbreakable by hand tools. Secondary locking mechanisms, window pins, secondary locks, security bars, add additional friction to window entry. Bars are effective, but carry serious fire egress concerns and should only be used with quick release mechanisms that allow exit from inside. Way 12. Lighting as a deterrent. Darkness is the friend of anyone who wants to approach your property undetected. Eliminating it, or at least controlling it, is one of the most cost-effective security investments available. Motion-activated lighting that covers approach paths, entry points, and the perimeter of a structure accomplishes two things simultaneously. It removes the cover of darkness from anyone attempting to approach undetected, and it signals to anyone watching from inside that something is moving where movement shouldn't be. The psychological effect on an opportunistic intruder of suddenly being flooded with light is not trivial. Being visible is genuinely deterring for anyone who was counting on not being seen. Solar-powered motion lights are particularly relevant in a crisis context because they operate independently of grid power. A property with functioning exterior lighting when the surrounding neighborhood is dark announces both occupancy and preparedness. Two things that matter differently depending on the threat category. To opportunists, it says, "This place has people and they're paying attention." That's often enough. The interior lighting discipline matters equally. A dark house is more inviting than a lit one to someone looking for an unoccupied target. Timers, battery-powered interior lights, and the general practice of maintaining the appearance of normal occupancy, even when shelter-in-place protocols mean you're keeping a low profile, work against the assumption that darkness makes homes good targets. One practical note: directing your own exterior lights in ways that illuminate approaches while leaving your observation positions in relative darkness gives you a significant tactical advantage. You can see them clearly. They cannot see you clearly. This is not complicated, but it requires thinking about where the light is going rather than just whether the light is on. Way 11. Dogs. The oldest security system. Before alarm systems, before motion sensors, before electronic surveillance of any kind, humans used dogs to protect their homes and livestock. There is a reason this practice has continued unbroken for thousands of years. It works. A dog provides 3 security functions that no electronic system replicates. First, early warning. A dog's hearing and smell are dramatically more sensitive than any human's, and a dog that alerts to an intruder does so before any electronic sensor would have detected anything. Second, deterrence. Visible evidence of a dog, barking, movement, a water bowl by the door, is one of the most consistently cited factors that causes opportunistic criminals to select a different target. Studies of convicted burglars, including a study conducted by researchers at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, published in 2013, found that the presence of a dog was among the top deterrents cited by those surveyed. Third, physical protection. A trained protection dog provides a level of physical deterrence that no passive security measure can approach. Large breed dogs with strong territorial instincts, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Rottweilers, Dobermans are the classic choices for protection. But even a small, loud dog provides the early warning and deterrence functions effectively. The dog doesn't have to be capable of stopping a determined intruder to be valuable. It has to make intruders aware that stealth is no longer available to them. In a crisis scenario, a dog also provides psychological benefits to the household that shouldn't be underestimated. Alert, loyal, and attuned to the emotional state of the people around them, dogs have served as companions in exactly the kinds of stressful, isolating situations that a genuine crisis creates. Way 10. Develop situational awareness habits. Security is not a thing you install, it's a practice you maintain. And the foundation of that practice is knowing what's normal so that you recognize what isn't. Situational awareness, the continuous, low-effort habit of observing your environment and noting changes, is what allows you to detect a developing threat before it becomes a crisis. A person walking the street 3 times in an hour who appears to be studying your property. A vehicle parked in an unusual position with occupants who don't get out. Unfamiliar faces in a neighborhood that is contracted to known people during a crisis. None of these are certainties, but all of them are worth registering and monitoring. The OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, developed by military strategist Colonel John Boyd for fighter pilot decision-making, applies directly to civilian security contexts. The person who has already observed and oriented to their environment acts faster and more effectively than the person who is still trying to figure out what's happening when something starts. This is not about being paranoid, it's about being present. Establishing observation positions that allow monitoring of approaches without being visible from the outside is a practical extension of this principle. A window with good sightlines to the approach, covered with a curtain that allows observation from inside without visibility from outside, gives you information advantage in any developing situation. Keeping a written log of unusual observations during a crisis period, noting times, descriptions, and patterns, builds a picture over days that individual observations don't reveal. Patterns that might be dismissed as coincidence in isolation become clear warnings when documented. Way 9. Communication systems within the household. In any situation requiring a coordinated defensive response, communication between members of a household is the difference between a coordinated response and a chaotic one. And in a crisis where cell infrastructure may be compromised, you cannot assume your phone will work. Pre-established communication protocols, where each person goes when an alert is sounded, what signals mean what, who handles which responsibilities, need to be worked out in advance and practiced. A household that has never discussed these things will spend the first critical minutes of any incident figuring out what everyone else is doing. A household that has practiced a response knows exactly where to be and what to do within seconds. Short-range two-way radios, FRS/GMRS radios, the kind sold at sporting goods stores, provide reliable communication across a property and between adjacent buildings without requiring any infrastructure. In a scenario where the neighborhood has organized for mutual defense, these radios allow real-time coordination between households that no other readily available technology can match at the same cost and simplicity. Signal systems, specific knocks, light signals, pre-arranged phrases that carry specific meanings, supplement radio communication with options that work when radio silence is tactically appropriate. Pre-industrial communities used variations of these systems routinely. They are not complicated, and they do not require any equipment. Way 8. Food and supply security. Don't advertise what you have. One of the fastest ways to become a target during a crisis is to be visibly better supplied than your neighbors. Cooking smells that carry outside, visible stockpiles through windows, generators running when nothing else in the neighborhood has power, exterior trash that reveals what's being consumed inside. All of these advertise the presence of resources in ways that attract exactly the wrong kind of attention. Operational security, OPSEC in military terminology, applied to a home during a crisis, means managing what information leaves your property. Blackout curtains that prevent interior light from being visible at night, cooking methods that minimize smell dispersion, generator use at times and in configurations that don't stand out, and careful management of waste and packaging to avoid revealing what's being consumed are all practical applications of this principle. The social dimension matters equally. Discussing your supplies, your preparations, or your security measures with anyone outside your trusted inner circle creates information risks that are difficult to control. People who wouldn't think of stealing from you under normal circumstances may behave differently when their own families are suffering. The information that you have significant supplies, shared casually before a crisis with neighbors or acquaintances, becomes active targeting information once conditions deteriorate. This is uncomfortable to think about because it runs against the natural instinct toward community and generosity. The resolution isn't to be miserly with neighbors. Community cooperation is itself a survival strategy and one of the most important on this list. It's to be thoughtful about what information leaves the household and to whom. Way 7. Build community alliances before you need them. No individual household, regardless of how well prepared it is, can maintain 24-hour defensive vigilance indefinitely. Sleep deprivation alone will defeat any single household defense within days. The solution to this problem has been the same throughout human history: community organization. Neighborhood watch systems that existed before a crisis provide the social infrastructure that can be adapted to a more serious mutual defense role when conditions require it. The relationships, communication channels, and sense of shared responsibility that a functional neighborhood watch builds are far more valuable than any specific procedure or equipment. In the absence of an existing organization, crisis conditions create an accelerated version of the community building process. People who share a geographic area and a common threat have powerful incentives to cooperate. The practical starting point is identifying immediate neighbors who are present, capable, and trustworthy, and establishing basic coordination, shared early warning, agreed-upon response protocols, and resource-sharing arrangements that benefit everyone. Historical examples of community defense organizations forming rapidly under crisis conditions are extensive. The British Home Guard, formed in 1940 within days of a government call for volunteers to defend against potential German invasion, enrolled over 1 million men within its first 6 weeks. Ordinary civilians who organized with remarkable speed around a shared threat. The local militias and mutual defense organizations that appeared in New Orleans neighborhoods after Hurricane Katrina, in areas where official law enforcement had effectively withdrawn, followed the same pattern. Gavin de Becker, whose book The Gift of Fear examined how communities and individuals can recognize and respond to genuine threats, has consistently argued that social connection and mutual awareness are the most durable forms of security available to ordinary people, more durable ultimately than any technology or physical barrier. Way 6. Safe room. Preparation. A safe room, a hardened interior space within a structure where occupants can shelter if the outer layers of security have been breached, is the last line of physical defense before a situation becomes a direct confrontation. A functional safe room doesn't need to be a purpose-built panic room with steel walls and biometric locks, though those exist. At a basic level, it's an interior room, ideally with no exterior windows and no direct line of sight from exterior walls, with a solid core door, reinforced frame, and a secondary locking mechanism. An interior bathroom or closet in the center of a structure can be upgraded to this standard with relatively modest investment. The safe room needs to contain, at minimum, communication equipment, a charged phone, a two-way radio, a means of self-defense, basic first aid supplies, and a flashlight. If intended for extended use, water and a sanitation option become necessary. The point is not to live in the safe room, it's to have a defensible position from which to summon help and, if necessary, hold until the threat withdraws. Drilling the movement to the safe room, particularly with children, is as important as the room's physical preparation. Under high stress, practiced movements happen automatically. Unpracticed ones don't happen at all. Way 5. Non-lethal deterrence and defensive tools. Not every defensive situation requires or justifies lethal force, and having options between do nothing and shoot someone is tactically valuable. Non-lethal deterrence and defensive tools fill that gap, and in many situations are more appropriate responses than any alternative. Pepper spray, oleoresin capsicum in aerosol form, is one of the most effective non-lethal deterrents available. Law enforcement grade OC spray with a Scoville heat unit rating above 2 million causes severe pain, temporary blindness, and respiratory distress. It works on most people regardless of their physical size or state of intoxication. It's inexpensive, widely available, easy to use, and legal in most jurisdictions. Air horns and alarm systems that create sudden, loud noise serve a deterrent function that's easy to underestimate. Noise attracts attention, and attention is the last thing most intruders want. A 120 decibel alarm triggered at a perimeter breach doesn't stop anyone physically, but it removes the one thing opportunistic intruders depend on: silence and invisibility. Defensive tools that don't require ammunition, batons, pepper spray, heavy flashlights that double as impact tools, remain functional regardless of supply chain conditions. Their utility is also legal in virtually all U.S. jurisdictions without the permitting requirements that apply to firearms. Booby traps, to be absolutely clear, are illegal under federal and state law in the United States and in most other countries, and carry severe criminal liability, including for injuries to anyone, including first responders and household members. They are not discussed here as a recommendation. They are mentioned because people think of them, and the legal reality is unambiguous. Way 4. Firearms and responsible home defense. This one is going to be handled factually and practically because it deserves that rather than either uncritical enthusiasm or reflexive avoidance. In a genuine SHTF scenario, where law enforcement response is unavailable or significantly delayed, firearms are the most effective means of individual and household self-defense available. This is not a political position. It's a capability assessment. A firearm in the hands of a trained person provides a defensive capability that no other tool provides. The training element is not optional. A firearm without training is a hazard to its owner and everyone in the household. Safe storage, safe handling, malfunction clearing, and, most importantly, the legal and psychological framework for understanding when lethal force is and is not justified are all components of firearms training that are as important as the ability to hit a target. The National Shooting Sports Foundation and the United States Concealed Carry Association both offer training resources and instructor directories. Taking a quality defensive firearms course is the single most important thing anyone can do after acquiring a firearm. For home defense specifically, shotguns and pistols are the most commonly recommended platforms. A 12-gauge shotgun loaded with .00 buckshot is extraordinarily effective at close range, has manageable recoil, and is legal in virtually every U.S. jurisdiction without special permitting. A full-size pistol in 9mm provides capacity, maneuverability in tight spaces, and genuine stopping power with modern defensive ammunition. Long-term ammunition storage is part of this preparation. Brass-cased commercial ammunition from major manufacturers, stored in sealed containers at cool, stable, low-humidity conditions, has a documented shelf life of several decades. Stocking ammunition while it's available, rather than during a crisis when demand spikes and supply collapses, is straightforward logistics. Way 3. Water and power independence. A household that depends on grid power and municipal water is a household with two significant vulnerabilities that can be exploited simply by waiting. A household with independent water and power is one that can function and maintain security when those systems fail. Water independence, at minimum, means stored water adequate for drinking and basic sanitation for an extended period, and a means of collecting or purifying additional water. The FEMA recommendation of 1 gallon per person per day for a minimum of 3 days is genuinely inadequate for anything beyond a very short-term disruption. A more realistic planning figure is 1 gallon per person per day for basic needs, with additional water budgeted for cooking, sanitation, and any medical needs, stored in quantities adequate for weeks, not days. A rainwater collection system, gutters directed into storage tanks, provides ongoing resupply in climates with adequate rainfall. A quality water filtration system, a Berkey-style gravity filter, or a ceramic filtration system, converts questionable water from streams or ponds into safe drinking water without requiring power or consumable chemicals. Power independence matters for security specifically because of communications. Radios need power, lighting, interior and exterior, and preservation of refrigerated medications or food. A modest solar array with battery storage can maintain these critical functions indefinitely. A generator provides higher power output but depends on fuel supply. The security dimension of self-sufficiency is that a household that doesn't need to venture out for water, food, or power is a household that can maintain shelter-in-place protocols effectively. Every trip outside during a crisis is an exposure. Reducing the necessity of those trips reduces the risk. Way 2. Psychological deterrence. Looking hard to hit. Before any physical confrontation, before any alarm is triggered, before any dog barks, there is a selection process. Potential threats assess available targets and choose based on perceived ease and risk. The goal of most home security is not to defeat a determined, capable adversary. It's to be a worse choice than the next option. Psychological deterrence is the deliberate management of how your property appears to that selection process. Multiple overlapping deterrence signals, visible fencing, evidence of dogs, exterior lighting, no obvious entry point that can be approached unseen, signs of occupancy and attention, create a cumulative impression of a hard target that redirects opportunists elsewhere. The broken windows research conducted by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling in the 1980s, which argued that visible signs of disorder attract crime while visible signs of maintenance and attention deter it, has direct application to home security. A property that looks maintained, occupied, and attended to is a more effective deterrent than one that looks abandoned or inattentive, even if the latter has a better door lock. Perception precedes engagement, and the perception you project determines whether engagement happens at all. Visible cameras, functional or not, contribute to this deterrence profile. They signal surveillance, which signals consequence. Research on their deterrence effect is mixed for determined professional criminals, but consistent for opportunistic ones. In a crisis context where the proportion of opportunistic threats is highest in the early stages, cameras and the appearance of comprehensive surveillance have genuine deterrence value. The deliberate projection of normalcy, a house that looks occupied but not ostentatiously well supplied, is the calibration that works best. Looking poor doesn't help if you're in a neighborhood where everyone looks poor. Looking normal, occupied, maintained, attended is the target presentation that best serves defense without advertising resources. Way 1. Mindset. The most important defense. Everything on this list, the fencing, the dogs, the lighting, the firearms, the community networks, is downstream of one thing: the decision, made in advance and committed to, that you will do what is necessary to protect your home and the people in it. That decision sounds obvious, but it isn't. Most people, when they imagine a genuine threat scenario, have not actually worked through what they would do, what they are willing to do, and where their limits are. The person who has not made those decisions in advance will make them under extreme stress, in the dark, with incomplete information and elevated adrenaline. That's a terrible time to be figuring out your values and your limits. The mindset that underlies effective home defense is not aggression. It's not the fantasy of a heroic confrontation. It is deliberate, calm, clear-eyed commitment to protecting what matters, beginning with every possible deterrence and de-escalation measure, through to whatever becomes necessary if those measures fail. Former Navy SEAL and author Jocko Willink has articulated this as extreme ownership, the principle that you are responsible for the outcomes in your area of responsibility, and that responsibility requires preparation, decision, and follow-through. The practical expression of this mindset is doing the work before the need arrives. The person who has trained, who has prepared, who has built the community networks and hardened the entry points and established the protocols, that person is calm when the moment comes because they've already made the decisions. The person who hasn't done any of that is not calm. They're improvising in the worst possible conditions. An improvisation under extreme stress is not a survival strategy. Preparation is. 15 ways, and the honest truth is that none of them work in isolation. The perimeter doesn't help if you don't have the awareness to notice it's been breached. The firearm doesn't help if you haven't trained with it. The community network doesn't exist if you haven't built it. Home defense in a genuine crisis is a system, and systems require all components functioning together. Most of what's on this list is not expensive, not complicated, and not requiring any special authority or access. It requires time, attention, and the willingness to take seriously something that most people would rather not think about. That willingness, the decision to prepare rather than hope, is itself the first and most important step. If this gave you something actionable, hit the like button and subscribe. We dig into the practical, the historical, and the genuinely useful, the information that matters when things stop being normal. There's a lot more coming, and you'll want to be here for it.